In 1980, the Rolling Stones released Emotional Rescue, an album that got people talking. It was a big album that came after another big album. So is it a hidden gem, or did they make some mistakes by going in some weird directions? So that's what we're going to talk about. I first heard this album when I was about 9 years old. My older brother had it. It was 1980. This was the first new Rolling Stones album that I had ever listened to. Before that, I had only known the hits. I had one album before that, which was Through the Past Darkly. That one with that weird like stop sign album cover. That was pretty cool. So I knew the hits, but this one I heard like the new songs on the radio, which was Emotional Rescue and She's So Cold. So this was my first time listening to this album. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's celebrating an anniversary around this time. Some sources say June 23rd, some say June 20th. So it's celebrating, which is now, I guess, 45 years. Is that right? Yeah, 45 years. So let's talk about it. So basically in today's video, I'm going to be talking about like the comeback, the recording sessions, the musical direction, the disco influence, and just the band dynamics, album art. That's something that's really cool. How it was received, the legacy it has, and then I'm going to go over the key tracks and why it's being reevaluated as an underrated gem. So let's get into it. So basically, this album came out after a very big album called Some Girls from 1978 that had some really big hits like Miss You, Beast of Burden, a couple other really big hits. So that was kind of like a comeback album for them, and they needed to release a very strong follow-up. So they released this album, Emotional Rescue. Some Girls was kind of an experimental album. There's like a little bit of punk rock, a little bit of disco. But in general, they stayed true to their rock roots. But they were under pressure, no pun intended, even though that's a different band, but they were under pressure to deliver a strong follow-up. So they recorded this album throughout 1979, first in Compass Point Studios in Nassau, Bahamas, then at this other place in Paris, which I'm not going to be able to pronounce correctly, and then they finished it off in New York City. And they actually recorded a lot of songs, and a lot of these songs were left over, which were included on the next album, which would be Tattoo You, including Hang Fire, Little TNA, No Use in Crying. And I actually did a review of Tattoo You, and I'm going to link it to the end screen. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on towards the end. And the band was also going through some problems. Keith Richards had some legal problems with a drug charge in Toronto, and that was a whole different story. It basically cast a shadow over the band, but a lot of people talk about this album the same way they talk about Kiss's Dynasty album, because they say it's a disco album, but I don't really think it's a disco album. I think maybe the title track, Emotional Rescue, might have some like dancey disco qualities, but it kind of gets labeled as a disco album. And I think the reason is that the song Emotional Rescue itself has Mick Jagger's falsetto vocals, which I always thought was kind of weird because I had never heard them before. According to Mick Jagger, he said he wrote the basic foundation of the song on the electric piano, and it was cut quickly to live tracks with Charlie Watts and Ronnie Wood, who was actually playing bass on that track. And then it was kind of like he described this ad-libbed part, which is kind of like a joke, saying there was some spontaneity in this track. It was also a time when the band's members were in different places in their personal lives. For example, Keith Richards was getting clean, starting a new relationship. Mick Jagger was just all over the world, jet-setting. And there was a little bit of tension between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Keith Richards wanted a little more involvement in business decisions. And then Bill Wyman was vocal about potentially leaving the band. But despite these individual paths, the band managed to record a lot of material for this. As for the album art, I've always thought it was pretty cool because I always thought it looked like some type of like x-ray, but I did some research and it's actually these thermographic photos. There's an artist whose name is Roy Adzak, and he used something called a thermal camera that measures heat emissions. I guess it's something similar to like the movie The Predator, if you remember that. Get to the chopper! I guess it's the same concept, and the original release came wrapped in this large color poster, and it had more thermal shots of the band and encased in a plastic bag. So that was pretty cool. I actually don't remember those back with the album when I had it, but I was only like 9 years old back then, so I don't really remember. But it was released and it was a successful album. The critics were kind of mixed. Some critics liked it a lot. Some said it wasn't as good as Some Girls, and other critics didn't like the disco leanings, and others liked the fact that they were continuing to experiment with their sound. But in general, the album has held up pretty well. A lot of people say it's kind of like a bridge album where it connects their 70s material and their 80s material. So it does serve a purpose in that regard. Now let's talk about the songs. 5 key tracks. First one, Emotional Rescue. That's the most recognizable track from the album. It was a top 10 hit. It had the falsetto vocals, the disco and R&B influence, and it was kind of a continuation of their other hit, Miss You, from Some Girls, which kind of went in that disco direction. It's just really a good example of the Rolling Stones trying to fit in to the musical landscape of that time. Also some really cool saxophone. I like that part. But probably not my favorite song. I think my favorite song is the next one, She's So Cold. It's just more traditional rock and roll, hard rock, whatever you want to call it. This was another single, and it's just a really great song. I like the guitar riff, and it's just one of those just straight ahead, basic rock and roll songs. So that's one really great. The other song is the one that kicks off the album, called Dance Part 1. Kind of like that disco type of thing already, but I think it's more funk and groove and R&B instead of like disco, but that's really my opinion of it. There's also the song Let Me Go. This is more just straightforward rhythm and blues, typical Rolling Stones. This one has the Keith Richards playing a really great guitar solo. You're gonna get it straight from the shoulder. And another one, All About You. This is Keith Richards on lead vocal. This is a bluesy ballad. And it really shows his raw and emotional songwriting and singing style. It really shows a different side of the band. So it's another standout track. So as you can see, this album is very diverse. It kind of shows all different sides of the band. And there's some lesser known tracks like Send It To Me. This one has a little bit of reggae on it. So that one's pretty cool. Down in the Hole, another traditional blues with some harmonica playing. This is another standout, just straightforward. The blues. One called Summer Romance, which is more of an up-tempo, straightforward rock song. Talk about why it's considered an underrated gem. I think the big reason is because it's one of those albums that's in between two big albums. Something along the lines of Deep Purple's In Rock and Machine Head, and in between that was Fireball. So the same concept here between Some Girls and Tattoo You. So it kind of gets overlooked a lot. So I think that's one aspect of it. Also the disco factor. Some people like it, and there was a lot of backlash about it, but I don't think it's a disco album. I think it just has some influence on that one song on the title track, but otherwise it's just not really a disco album. It just has all these different influences like rock, and there's a little bit of punk, a little bit of country, and lots of other stuff. But in general, it's a Rolling Stones album. And basically, that's another reason I think some people thought it was kind of like a grab bag of styles. It was inconsistent, featuring a disco, reggae, country, blues, rock. But I think that's a good thing. I like when albums have a lot of variety, but they don't sound like cut and paste, not like they're going from one genre to the other. They did it in a way that makes it sound cohesive, and I thought that was really good. Not a lot of bands can pull that off. Sometimes these albums, they kind of feel like they're all over the place, but I think this album really sounds like the songs belong there. And I also think there are some pretty strong tracks. I think She's So Cold, that's a great song. I think that's one of my favorite Rolling Stones songs of all time out of all of their eras. And then there's different songs, some great deep cuts, All About You, Down in the Hole, that great blues track. And so it's pretty cool. And also this album kind of carries over to the next one, Tattoo You, because that was kind of like a compilation album, and I talked about that in my other video, which I'm going to link in just a little bit. So in conclusion, I would say this is an underrated gem. It gets overlooked. It's a good album. It gets overshadowed by the one before it and the one after it. And I think it's just one that we should revisit So that's my opinion. So as I've been talking about, check out my review of Tattoo You. I'm going to stick that right there. I did that on its anniversary, which I believe was the 45th anniversary, or it might have been the 40th anniversary, I forget. But it was also the day that Charlie Watts passed away, so I also paid tribute to Charlie Watts in that video, so you can check that out next. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Please give the video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you have not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. I will see you in the next one.